I'm actually going live just now. I just went live on Facebook and YouTube. I'm so sorry I'm late. Greetings, everybody on there from Spain and from Georgetown, Texas. That's where Jessica is. But Jessica was on time. I was late. I was running errands with my sister. I've been given the okay to share that she had a baby, and that's why I'm here. So he is the cutest thing you've ever seen in your whole life. He's like he's so cute. And I'm helping her for the next 3 weeks. So next week, we're not doing anything today. We had doctor's appointments and things that we needed to get for the baby. And I showed a picture of me having lunch here. Having lunch with wine is not a big deal. We did that, but then we have other things to do. So that's why I ran so late. So I apologize for everybody who was looking forward to starting earlier. But here we are, and we are talking about potentially. Have you discussed the silent recall conversation?
I have not, no. But really quickly, before I'll let you talk about that. So who owns your pet food brand? Nestle is, let's see, $19.38 billion in earnings in 2022. Mars, $19.5 billion in 2022. So Colgate-Palmolive, and those are the two biggest. Colgate-Palmolive is the next biggest at $3.7 billion. So Mars and Nestle are the huge players, and these are not like family run companies. These are what is that I'm looking for?
Conglomerates.
Yes, these are huge conglomerates that have boards of people.
International, yes.
Yes, that are like, there is zero reason to have loyalty to these huge conglomerates, in my opinion.
Yeah, agree. I agree. Not one brand that I would go so hard for. Like, I literally, when you and I were texting, I was thinking to myself, like, there are a lot of brands that I love and that I am loyal to, but there are none that after seeing some kind of sign that something's up, that I would go to bat for so hard. And I don't really understand why there's such a misplaced loyalty to this conglomerate when fellow pet parents are telling you that they've lost their pet potentially from a tainted dog food, which is not really that uncommon, or cat food. It's not that uncommon. Recalls are not uncommon. So like, I don't get it. It doesn't compute for me. I think that because people are like, oh, it's against Purina specifically. Purina is one of the major players. So volume wise, if there's a problem, it's going to affect more people, right? So like, that is really just a game of numbers. If you have a multi-billion-dollar company versus a $1 million company, of course they're selling more products. So if there is a problem, we're going to see it in that company before we see it in the smaller company. Not that it's not happening in the smaller company, but it's a matter of numbers and volume. So I don't get it. I really don't. I don't trust that. I mean, it's not that I'm like anti-government. I'm not any of that, but I don't necessarily, go to bat for the FDA either. I recognize that there are vested interests involved, and I don't go to bat for any conglomerate, not in this industry, not in any industry, because at the end of the day, they are for-profit businesses with vested interests. And you and I talked about how potentially it would be cheaper for them to just pay for veterinary costs and cremation costs than it would be to pull product off of their shelves. So cheaper to just pay out without really asking people to jump through so many hoops, because I don't feel like they're asking for that many hoops to be jumped through right now, from what I've read in many pet owners, like testimonials about what happened and that they contacted this person and that person. I know Chewy's doing a lot of refunding. They're not really asking for that much stuff. So obviously they're more open than their online rumors post would suggest. But it's still cheaper to do all that, because at the end of the day, they want those billions to still sell, and they'll do damage control with whomever contacts them, which is going to be a lot smaller than the people who are still buying.
Absolutely. And this isn't exclusive, like Isabel said, this is not exclusive of the pet food industry. This is any industry. Like the vehicle that you are driving, they're going to do the exact same thing. They're going to run the cost analysis of having to pay out claims versus doing a recall on a line of vehicles. And that's how they make their decision on whether they do a recall or not. This isn't, and that's just one example that I can think of, but that's how the world works. And being aware of that, like it's not me being all, Miss Skeptical over here. It's just an awareness of how the world works so that we can make our decisions appropriately.
Right. Absolutely. And, the next thing we wanted to talk about, and again, I apologize for having missed everything that Jessica shared. I'll be sure to catch up when we log off. But, there are people there are consumers saying that they can't find specifically because, again, this conversation centers a lot around Purina just because of volume, but that they can't find their Purina products anymore. Like they're gone off the shelves, or I've seen where people are saying, like, I went to the grocery store and the only thing that was on the shelf was Purina because nobody's buying it, right? Because like people are aware and they're like scared to buy it. But in some cases, people who've had like auto ship set up or subscription set up are getting cancellations because that particular product is out of stock. Some people are describing that as a silent recall, where they kind of take things off the shelves. They don't take responsibility. And again, this is not just a specific brand. This is something that is practiced in many industries, I'm sure. And this is basically just so that they can put an end to the illnesses without having to take like full public responsibility. But, again, I don't believe that anybody does these things on purpose. So like, I'm not here saying that anybody's the devil, because these things do happen. It's just par for the course with an unregulated industry. But again, it's damage control. Like, what can I do to mitigate the issue, the problem, without calling attention to my reputation, to my brand? And I do believe that the more we see these out of stock situations or testimonials or experiences, the more I think they are taking action. We just may not know about it. Like, it may not be something that they do through their PR team or, through the FDA.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know because they're not going to tell you, right? Like it's complete speculation on anyone's part right now to say that they are or are not pulling. And it could also be that companies, store owners are making these decisions as well, and we just don't know it.
Or that the supplier noticed the problem and now there really is a shortage in the product because the supplier has eliminated an ingredient. So there's a lot, again, like, we talk about dog food as formulations for a reason, because they are formulated with a ton of ingredients. So if one ingredient is not, they can't source it, then they can't make that formulation unless they find a different one. And that takes time. So there, again, it's speculation, but it's not to demonize any brand. These things happen. These things can happen. Mistakes can happen. Like, that's just, and it's one of those things that kind of teaches me. And I do like 50-50 more or less with kibble and raw freeze-dried dog food for my dog, and my cat is on almost fully freeze-dried food, the same one. But I feel like it only confirms that splitting food is probably the best way to go. Because that way, if you have an issue with one of your foods, you still have your dog or cat accustomed to eating something else. So it's almost like a really good lesson in diversifying your pet food and not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I hope, and like, it's the only thing getting me through really with this is just the hope that I have that any pet parent who even if they're not feeding a brand that's currently on the list is like, oh man, like this could happen, and like, let's get something else on board. Let's rotate more. Like, even if whatever is going on in your life, the only thing you feel like you can feed is a kibble product. If that's all you're going to feed, still rotate brands,
Yeah.
rotate proteins. It's not like, it's been shoved down our throat so much that we find one food for our dog or a cat, whatever it is, and keep them on it for the rest of their lives. No, absolutely not. Like, I'm not going to eat a bowl of Cheerios for every meal for every day for the rest of my life. That's not going to happen. No. Why would I do that to my pets?
Right. And that is pretty much the equivalent of a lot of these dogs' foods. Like, I remember writing a column for the Alexandria Times when I first started writing in 2010, where it was like, your dog's weight issue is your fault, right? Because like, they're not opening the fridge and making themselves a peanut butter and like bacon sandwich. So it's really your fault. Let's take responsibility.
Oh, that sounds
but also
good.
it was like, the kibble is like the equivalent of a bag of Doritos in some ways, right? So like, really, truly, like in many cases, we are feeding them, and I feed kibbles. So like, and I recognize that that's like where we are and that's what we can do right now. And I try to put fresh foods in and all that. But at the end of the day, there has to be a recognition that this is not optimum food. This is not optimum quality. This is not, we get what we can. I love Susan Thixton's the list on the truth about pet food. If you're trying to upgrade, that's where I would say go, go, go. But at the end of the day, we're feeding our pets Doritos for their whole lives. Like, even if you were eating Doritos or Cheerios all of your life, you'd want to switch maybe to the Dorito from the Cheerio, or from the Cheerio to the Dorito, because it is also boring, and diversifying food is always good for everybody. It's good for everything, just to keep things new for your pet. So I have a friend who was very skeptical about this whole thing, and I think she remains skeptical, and I don't think she'll even believe it until there's a recall, which there may never be. But she told me that she was at ease because she mixes 3 different types of food. So I think it's all commercial. I think it's some kibble, some, maybe some canned stuff. But she was more comfortable because she hadn't put all her eggs in one basket. And, she said, maybe I'll stop with the Purina brand or whatever brand she said for the time being, but at least I know my dog can do the other 2, and I'll keep on top of the news. And I do think that that's really a smart thing to do for pet parents that are feeding kibble. And for cats, alternate your canned food. It's really easy to do that. Cats don't really react as poorly as some dogs do to changes in their food. And obviously it depends on your cat, and sometimes they're finicky, but there are ways to get them, used to a different food, and keeping it. If you start from day one diversifying the food, it's a lot easier to keep it moving, rather than if now after 10 years you're like, hey cat, you've been on this for 10 years, now I'm going to introduce something completely different. Like, yes, of course your cat is a creature of habit, and they're going to take a minute to like say okay, but there are tips online. I know the Two Crazy Cat ladies have always given tips on how to introduce other foods. I'm sure Jessica has tons of tips for if you're going from like a commercial food to something more fresh, or how to make it more fresh, how to make it more appealing. But diversifying the food, I think this is what this is about. This is about not putting all our eggs in one basket as pet parents.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I hope it kind of, every time something like this happens, it's like, please, like, more people need to come over. Like, leave the dark side is what I like. Just leave the dark side.
I know.
But just being aware of what's going on, like, that's the biggest thing. Like, and that's what recalls do, on like a mass scale. And again, like Isabel said, we don't know if we're going to get to that point of a recall, but on a mass scale, it wakes people up to, oh my gosh, like, there's a problem. And so if we can be proactive with solutions for people to find when they go online, like, that's I think the best case scenario.
Yes. Yeah, and there's a website. It's not Susan's website. It's Dog Food Advisor. Dog Food Advisor allows you to get on their mailing list for pet food recalls. So if there is an actual recall, which again, there are a lot of steps before we get there, but if there is a recall, and sometimes it's literally like, like Victor, right? Victor in the fall. I don't remember what the ingredient was, but it wasn't like this dramatic where dogs were, or cats and dogs were dying, and then pet parents kind of found the missing link or like the correlation. This was a situation where I think that the brand itself went to FDA and like they did what they needed to do and they did a recall. And if you're feeding that brand, like I feed Victor and I get mine from Chewy, and I never heard from Chewy, right? Like I never heard, because you assume that like with your car, Toyota or Kia or BMW, they're going to send you a letter that says there's been a recall. And so you assume you're going to get notified. In this case, I did not get notified, and I don't think that my product was implicated. So maybe that's why I did not get notified. But I did get an email from Dog Food Advisor advising that this brand was under a recall. So that gave me the opportunity to dig a little deeper. So if you do feed kibble, I think signing up for their newsletter is a great way to just kind of cover yourself. Obviously, keep following us, keep following Dr. Judy Morgan, keep following all of these raw feeders like Jessica, nutritionists that are going to tell you, like, this is what I do, these are the tips I have. But also, if something comes across their radar, they're going to share it. So obviously follow people, because this is the quickest way to get your news in many ways. But I do think that that's like a really good way to get peace of mind for pet parents that feed kibble or commercial foods. It's kibble and wet foods, and anything commercial, really. They'll send you an email, an automatic email, if there is a pet food recall. So I think that's really a smart way to just cover yourself, cover your pet. My husband is commenting. Did you see my husband commenting on Facebook? I always thought of diversifying as trying different foods versus mixing different foods. Such a good idea, so that your pet is always used to whatever you have. Yeah, so like you don't have to go from one completely different brand to another. There's a lot of times you can do a very slow mix in and then go to the other. There's a lot of ways to play with it. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're feeding according to the label. So like when you're mixing foods, you need to make sure that the portions are good. Jessica has some tips or has some concerns regarding mixing like really good whole foods with synthetic vitamins, because if you feed them at the same time, they might be competing against each other. So there is a little bit more education and checks and balances I feel like you need to follow with mixing and diversifying, but the option is there. Like I think that long gone are the days where we have to feed this one bag of food, forever till death do us part, right? Like I feel like long gone are those days.
I know, and that's the thing. Like you see pet parents post on social media, they've been feeding the same food for 10 years. Like, oh, my heart, right? Like that poor baby.
And they're the ones that are having the hardest time with this, right? They're like, what do I do? Because it really is like daunting at this point. Like that's one thing you didn't think you were going into 2024 thinking about, but now you are.
Absolutely. Yes. And but even if you are mixing fresh food with synthetic vitamin, I mean, I'd still rather you do that than, we can worry about the rest later. Like for now, let's mix things in and get it all, get everybody transitioned and up to speed. And with cats, it can, like, I feel you with cat. Like I have 4 senior cats. I hear you. I feel you. It is not easy with them. And, if I had known when they were kittens, I would have done right by them from the start, but I didn't know. So, I feel like I'm in the same shoes as a lot of pet parents when it comes to cats, because I did switch them over completely to canned food maybe 6 or 7 years ago now. So they haven't had kibble in quite a while, but even trying to switch them to healthier foods has really been challenging for me. I get whatever freeze-dried foods I can into them, and some of them will eat some, and some of them will eat different ones. So my house looks like a freaking pet store. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm just trying to do the best I can for them. And I get that not everybody can do that, but I think, hopefully we can have more. It is certainly more difficult to find commercially available foods for cats that do not contain synthetic vitamins and minerals.
Yeah.
Yes, hardest transition I've ever done from Rad Cat to homemade. Let me tell you, I actually like that when Rad Cat was closing their doors. Within like the year before that was when I found Rad Cat, and my cats were actually eating it. And that was so difficult. Oh my goodness. I get it. That was so difficult because finding, and if you are familiar with Rad Cat, they were doing raw food for cats. And the big distinction with them was, if I remember correctly, they were using eggshell calcium versus grinding up bone. So it was so much more palatable for cats. So getting like it was a whole really unfair thing, in my opinion, that happened. They had to close their doors and stop producing. It really was difficult for people to transition. So, yeah, I feel you, Mary, on that one. But yeah, it is with cats. And I think, I think I don't remember if I said this when you were on or not. The same thing for dogs that I mentioned earlier, we can do with our cats. So for dogs, I was saying, because somebody asked about transitioning and not having GI upset or trying to avoid GI upset. And I was like, well, what we can do for an otherwise healthy adult dog certainly is to feed them a bland diet for a few days and then slowly add in the new food to the bland diet. So like a cooked turkey with either pumpkin or sweet potato, and that's a bland diet to me. Mm-hmm. And we can do something similar for our cats. Cats are so much more like aware of texture in their food that you can try like cooking up some ground turkey, but I don't know if all cats will be okay with that texture. You can also cook, you can just boil a chicken breast. And I have done this to where like I will boil some chicken breast for my cats and then take some of the juice, some of the water that I boiled it in, and put that in a blender or use an immersion blender to blend that up into like a loose pate almost. That is a texture that all of my cats are good with.
Yeah.
And so take something bland like that for a couple of days. They're going to love it, right? I mean, it's a fresh piece of chicken that you've cooked up, right? It's like, ooh, like a really yummy treat for them.
Yeah.
And
sure.
Slowly add in some of the new food that you're trying to introduce, like really, really slowly for cats.
Yeah, but, so they're not like shocked by the change in the flavor, and texture. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, but in this case, it's like I'd rather they go hungry, like in this case, right? Like in the case where there may be something toxic in the food you're feeding. For me, I'd rather they go hungry. I'll order some Bear's Bites and give them some chicken hearts for a day until, I can figure something out. But I mean, for me,
I mean,
like, take that chance of illness out of the equation and go from there.
Right. Well, that was the other thing, like the couple of days potentially of GI upset. And this, I think, does happen more so in dogs than cats, like you were saying earlier. That potential for a couple of days of GI upset, in my opinion, and this is something you're going to have to gauge for yourself, for your pet, in my opinion, it is so much less risky to go through that couple of days of GI upset versus the alternative if you happen to have a food that is tainted or potentially tainted. It's just, oh my goodness. But for cats, the thing is with cats, they will starve themselves. Dogs won't. Dogs will eventually eat whatever you give them, and cats won't. So you do kind of have to be a little a little careful, a little more careful with our cats. But yeah, it's just, it's.
Well, and also what I'm seeing, and I'm sure Jessica, you may have already mentioned this, is that people now are starting to open new bags of food, right? After hearing all this, and they've been like, oh, my pet's fine on this food. And so now people are starting to open new bags of food and see a reaction from their pet that's like, right? They like
Yeah.
go up to the bowl, they sniff
Yeah.
it, and they kind of take a minute. And that could be a sign that something's up. If you're, a lot of people are like, my dog has been fine, and I just, I've been feeding him the same bag since November. Okay, well, again, it could just be some formulations. It could be some bags within some product within that formulation. So just stay on it, right? Like this is not a
Yeah.
put it in the auto feeder and walk away. This is not one of those times you want to do that. This is one of those times where you want to take a pause, watch your pet eat, see if they have any reaction, note it if they do, see it, don't just let your pet out in the yard, go with them, see what their number twos look like. There's things that there are things that we can do that are just kind of like checks and balances and under these situations. And honestly, I personally do that always. Like I want to see my pet eat. I want to see my pet's poo. It is just I was a professional pet sitter for 12 plus years, and you know what I did every day? I told people what their pet's poo looked like. And I think that they appreciated that because they at least had a little notebook or an update in our software that told them that on Tuesday they pooped midday and it looked all good, right? So then Wednesday, if they started to have upset stomach and they needed to go to the vet by Friday, then they knew that Tuesday was the last day they had a good poo. So these things are good to have. Like you've talked about diaries, food journals for your pets. Poo journals are a good idea. Taking that extra second to watch your pet eat, make sure that they finished everything. Never just like throw medicine on the kibble and hope that they took it. Those little tiny extra steps are really truly like those are where the money is made, I guess, like where the magic is made, because that's where you can notice that if you start to know your pet's routine, when they eat, how quickly they normally eat, how they usually receive their food, how their stomach usually operates, then when there's a discrepancy. But if your pet's like kind of just like living, I've seen these on TikTok where it's like this beautiful piece of furniture and you fill it with kibble and it just kind of like you like walk by and just like open a little window and out comes the kibble. Like this is not the time to do stuff like that. This is the time to portion it out, read the label, find out, keep the bag, do your due diligence.
Absolutely. And I just have to say, because I can't not say it, please don't use those big, like you're filling it up with a ton of kibble at one time, or like you said earlier, somebody's been feeding the same bag of kibble since November, like that.
Exactly.
Oh my Lord, I just want, please, like if you do buy bags that last you longer than a couple of weeks, put them in the freezer, please. Yeah. Like I know that freezer space is a premium. I get that.
Or just buy a smaller bag. Like for me, like I went from 4 dogs to 1 dog, right? So yeah, yes. Like our 40-pound bag is no longer what we need for 1 dog, right? Yes. So like buy the smaller bag. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive, but yeah. You wouldn't drink a wine that's been open for 2 months because the oxygen has ruined the wine. The same thing happens with your dog food, and especially if you're removing it from the bag that it's meant to be in, right? Like if you have to freeze it in the bag.
Yes. Yeah. Please don't remove it from the bag if at all possible. Even those containers, pet food containers, they are not designed for you to dump the bag into.
They're airtight. Like it's not. No. That's like for 4 days. Like that's like the cookies you baked, you put them in an airtight container for 4 days, right? Like same thing.
Yeah. Yes. And that really is primarily because there is a good chance by the time you get that bag, that fat is already oxidized. But certainly once you open that bag, right then it starts to oxidize the fat. And, nobody wants to eat rancid fat. It first of all is nasty, is gross, but also like it causes all kinds of havoc in the body and creates inflammation, and as if kibble isn't inflammatory enough, but please don't. Please don't.
Yeah, and also our pets are super sensitive, right? Like, so like I'm sure we've all been somewhere where we're having food and we're like, this isn't quite right, right? Like, our pets are much more sensitive. They smell things that we will never smell. You know, they take that food in with every sense. And sometimes like Labradors or Beagles, like they don't even take the time to smell it but they'll feel the consequences later. So when they have taken that step back, that's a sign that something's up with your dog's food or your pet's food. And I think that's something that I keep seeing, and people noticed it and kind of ignored it. And, you know, because we're not taught to really listen to our pets and like really read their body language, I feel like I want us to say, like, what is my pet telling me at the bowl? What do they need? What do they not need? What do they like? What do they not like? And it's, you know, sometimes I feel like even kids, we say like they're picky, or they're, you know, they only want to eat like junk. And it's like, maybe they just don't like something, and we got to trust why they don't like it, right? Like maybe they're trying to tell us something. So take that time. Is all kibble bad? Well, I believe that Susan Thixton has maybe 2 kibbles brands on her list in 2024. I just downloaded the list. It's $10 minimum donation, and you go to thetruthaboutpetfood.com, and I believe she has 2 kibbles. I literally downloaded it on the plane to Spain. So I have not looked at the list, but it is definitely a good place to start. The vast majority of kibble is not ideal. There is feed grade kibble and food grade ingredients in kibble. And so the better quality kibble, obviously the better for your pet. But the reality is it's a dead food, right? Like it's kind of like saying that we only need to eat protein powders every single meal. Like that's not ideal, right? Because it is a processed powder. Even if it's a great protein powder, maybe once a day, maybe as a meal replacement, maybe before working out. But like if you told me you were eating protein powder 24/7 for 365 days, I'd be like, ooh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same thing, same hesitation there.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, I want to meet pet parents where they're at as much as I can. So yeah, Susan's list is a wonderful, wonderful resource. Dr. Judy's list is is much shorter. So I mentioned that earlier, I think before you came on, and I'll post a link to her list in my stories at some point today. But yeah, it's, you know, it's not an ideal food for our pets. It's something that, granted, a lot of pet parents rely on, and that, you know,
it's practical.
That's where you are, and you know, yeah, like, but there are, even if you are like Isabel does, even if you are, there are things you can do. You can do, you know, part kibble diet and a part fresh food diet, or freeze dried raw food diet, something along those lines. So you just kind of have to figure out what you're able to do, and kind of work backwards from there.
Yes. Yeah. The good thing about Dr. Judy Morgan has a list. It's great. It's a great list, but it's like just like the names of the foods or whatever. It's not, Susan Thixton has like a cost breakdown per meal, per pound, or per like serving. So that is really helpful if you are on a budget, right? So like I look at that list and I don't even look at the name. I go straight to like the budget line and I say, okay, this is way too rich for my dog. And then I find something that's within my budget. So if you are budget conscious, I love that list for that reason. And again, it's like, we talked about this, I think it was last week. You can get sardines, you can, you know, do eggs, you can do things that are relatively, I know eggs had their moment in the sun where they were like a luxury food. I think we're coming back to somewhat normal egg levels, but depending on where you are, you can supplement your pet's food with some fresh foods. And there's so much about that online that you can learn about, and things that you can do, the right, the wrong, the tips, the best practices. So you're not held to kibble 100% of the time. When I added, I'll tell you what my dog eats. My dog eats green juju beef and Victor Senior Healthy Weight, because that's what my veterinarian recommended. But honestly, I wanted to like spruce it up, and I did. And she often gets like canned pumpkin and some other like meal toppers that are really natural, like a lamb meal topper from a good brand, whatever. And when I started doing this, there was no transition. There was no, like, it was a slow transition. Like, I just kind of started removing some of the kibble, adding some of the fresh foods, right? Like, just balancing things out. But there was never any stomach upset. Sometimes my husband, who is not as diligent as I am when it comes to pet feeding, I put all the goodies in there, and he just like puts the kibble in the bowl. She'll still eat it. So like, she's an easy dog. She definitely likes when I feed her better. I can see that the excitement is greater when I'm in the kitchen serving her than when he's in there, because I spruce it up real nice. But she still eats the other stuff. And even if he only feeds her the kibble, we're running out the door, he just feeds her the kibble, she does fine. So again, it's, we've been kind of conditioned to think that it has to be one formulation, one brand, and that if we do anything differently, it's going to end up in like this, like, I like to say a situation where you're gonna be like dealing with like diarrhea and vomiting. It's not always that intense. So just, if you have a dog with a sensitive stomach, obviously take extra precautions. Slippery elm is a great thing to like add during the transition, but don't be so scared that you kind of paralyze yourself because of the potential for a stomach upset.
Yeah. And the reality is, if you are going from one food to a higher quality food, or adding in more fresh foods, or going completely from a kibble diet to a completely fresh food diet, you likely will see some sort, whether your dog feels bad or not, you likely will see changes in their stool just from the body like flushing out all of the gunk.
Yeah.
That's actually a benefit. Like, I know we look at it as like, oh my God, I don't want to deal with, what the diarrhea or whatever it is,
Yes,
or the like
exactly.
mucus on the stool. But that's actually a benefit of switching to a fresh food diet,
Right.
is getting all of that junk and inflammation and out of the body, and cleaning up the mucus layer in the gut. And like, it's a benefit. So maybe we can start looking at it that way.
Exactly. It's so true. We're so concerned. Like, I remember being a first-time pet parent when Titan was 4 months old, came home, and I was at the vet constantly because he had like an upset stomach, right? And like, he was a puppy, and he had changed from like a farm situation to a suburban living situation, new food, all that. And I was like so panicked. And now my sister just had a baby, and he has like, an upset stomach, and I'm like, it's normal.
Yeah.
He's a baby. He doesn't have
Right.
a developed microbiota, right? Like, all these things to me are normal now. But like, why is it any different with any other species? Like, as puppies, they're going to develop issues because they're learning new foods. As seniors, their gut flora is going to change too. So there might be some, just even if you keep them on the same diet, there might be changes. So we need to like stop being so scared of a little stomach upset. Like, it's, we get stomach upset, and we keep about our day.
Keep going. I know, right? Okay, so if I choose fresh food diet, how do I make sure pet gets all the proper nutrients? So a couple of ways. There are commercially available fresh food diets, and if they are, they'll list that they're balanced to AAFCO standards, meets minimum AAFCO requirements for a balanced diet for dogs, cats, whatever it is. And I believe, again, when we get off, at some point today, I will post in my stories the link to Dr. Judy's recommended brands, and I'm like 99.9% sure everything on her list is balanced to AAFCO, meet minimum AAFCO requirements. If it's not, it will say that it is for supplemental feeding or something along those lines. But if you're trying to do a fresh food diet at home and make it yourself, that is trickier. Not because you can't do it, you absolutely can do it. I would just be kind of leery of recipes that you find online unless you know where they're coming from. So Dr. Judy has a good resource on her website, and she has books. In fact, like her Yin and Yang Nutrition for Dogs book, I believe those recipes are designed to rotate to get balance, if I'm not mistaken. But so like make sure if you do buy a book that you're reading everything in the book so that you don't just like rush to the recipes and think they're balanced, right? Because I'm pretty sure those are designed for rotational feeding. But there are recipes available. You can work with your veterinarian likely won't be able to help you with balanced recipes, but a veterinary nutritionist can, pet health coaches often can, canine nutritionists can. So just, if you find a recipe online, research who made the recipe, where it came from, that kind of thing. And also know that it is okay to balance over time if you have a healthy adult animal. So if you use like online feeding calculators and things like that, just make sure to rotate what you're using, the ingredients that you're using to create balance over generally a week. You would want to, make sure you get everything in within a week. But yeah, that's kind of a blanket
And you
generalized
have to make
recommendation.
the commitment, right? This is the thing about, you have to make the commitment of staying on top of things. You don't just, meet with a canine nutritionist one time and not follow up. You don't just, kind of throw ingredients in that are not part of. There's a commitment and there's a level of responsibility that goes with that. So that's the first step, I think, is recognizing whether you can afford to and whether you can really commit the time, and not only the time, but like that level of responsibility. Like, I'm doing this and I'm going to follow this person's recipe. I'm not going to just go willy-nilly. I forgot to go to the grocery store, I don't have eggs, I'm just going to, that there is that. And obviously, like, there are many people who do this extremely well. And there are a ton of pet parents who have done this so successfully. We used to feed raw, and we used to feed raw, homemade raw. And it was like a recipe that we followed from a trusted source. And it was fantastic. We stopped because now we have small children. I take care of my grandmother, all these things. So it's just too much, but it is totally doable. It is totally, sometimes when you think about the amount of money you're spending on like a high quality kibble, sometimes it's almost the same, if not better, depending on where you can source stuff from to feed raw fresh foods. But again, you won't know that until you really do your due diligence and get in there. So before you even take that on, just recognize whether or not it's a good time for you to take that on, and how honest you're going to be when making the recipe. Because like, there are people in my life that would say, I'm going to go raw and I'm going to make my own homemade, and I'd be like, awesome. And there are people in my life that I'd be like, please don't do that.
Right. Right. I know. Oh my
Please
gracious.
don't take that on. Yeah. So
Yeah.
just, I don't know you, but just there's,
Right.
and the good thing is there are so many resources out there that if you have the right personality, the right drive, the right motivation, you're going to do it amazingly well. But if that's not something that's on your top of your priority list, it is hard to keep up with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know you joined late, but I've been on for a while, so
I know. She's like, I'm going to go. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Sorry I was late again.
No.
But yeah, everybody was here. There's so many people. I'm so excited to see everybody. I will hopefully be on time next week. We're going to do this again. If you have any recommendations for topics we can cover, because I feel like unless there's an update, we've talked about this particular thing ad nauseum now. So unless there's, we'll look for some kind of cool news, some kind of new development in the pet industry, something like that. And if you have any recommendations, by all means, please let us know.
Yes, absolutely. I actually just got, I don't know if you saw Dr. Becker's email today. That was very interesting. But
I have not checked my email, so.
Okay. Yeah.
It is 7:30 p.m. today, like right now where I'm at. So I have been out and about, almost 7:30. I've been out and about all day. I am doing the night shift, the baby care. So I'm up till almost 4 a.m. and then I sleep in until like my sister woke me up at 11 because we had an appointment. Until my sister lets me, and then we do it all over again. So it's I'm kind of all over the place, but I do want to discuss something new and fun. And send me that
Yeah.
email if you can.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us, for participating, for asking questions, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye. Bye,
Oh,
everybody on
no, I need
Facebook
those.
and YouTube. Thank you
Yes.
so much. Bye.